Welcome to Tampa History, where you'll learn all about Tampa's yesteryears.
Welcome to Tampa History. Today you're going to learn about the origins of Tampa. You'll learn how Tampa came to be the city that it is today. Tampa, Florida is a major city near the Gulf Coast of Florida. Tampa is a city in and of itself, but it is also known as Tampa Bay, or the Tampa Bay area, as it is part of the Tampa, St. Petersburg and Clearwater metropolitan area. They are all separate cities, yet with population growth and expansion over the years, the area today is one big metropolis, being the second largest principality in the state of Florida, after Miami. The vast majority of Tampa natives still like the city to be referred to as Tampa, not Tampa Bay, as they do not reside in the water itself. Downtown Tampa, where the city originated, actually sits on Hillsborough Bay, and also at the mouth of the Hillsborough River, where it flows into the bay. Hillsborough Bay is at the foot of downtown, and is also situated on the east side of the South Tampa Peninsula. Hillsborough Bay connects to Tampa Bay at the southern tip of the South Tampa Peninsula, and Tampa Bay also fronts the southern part of St. Petersburg on the bay's western edge. MacDill Air Force Base is also located at the tip end of the South Tampa Peninsula and overlooks Tampa Bay. Old Tampa Bay is yet another bay connected to Tampa Bay, ebbing north, and lies between the western side of the South Tampa Peninsula, the northeastern sector of St. Petersburg, and also the eastern edge of the city of Clearwater. If you couldn't comprehend all of that, merely look at the map. Beautiful mansions and condos overlook Hillsborough Bay, along Bayshore Boulevard, and houses with boats in the backyard front Old Tampa Bay, or the canals that flow from it, in areas such as Beach Park and Culbreth Isles. Tampa also expands considerably, north, east, and west of downtown and the southern peninsula. Tampa is indeed a large city, but it wasn't always that way. Tampa started out as a scrubby civilian town, a bunch of sticks, really, around the year 1824, those residents being positioned right outside of Fort Brooke, if you wanna call it that, a paltry buffet of fortresses assembled of giant matchsticks, luckily none caught on fire, a designated United States fort and trading post, more of a keep the engines in check, will ya, kinda post, at the mouth of the Hillsborough River, where it flows into the Hillsborough Bay. Fort Brooke was thrown together in 1824 as an official military and trading post for the purpose of enforcing the Treaty of Moultrie Creek of 1823, a treaty, an agreement, more of a concession, really, between the United States government and the chiefs of some several bands and factions of Indians living in the present-day state of Florida, known, collectively, as the Seminoles. The treaty established, and granted, a reservation in the center of the Florida Peninsula, and was located roughly between what is today Ocala, and extended down to the lower end of Tampa Bay. The land was all inland, and all restricted, on both sides, top and bottom, to prevent the Seminoles from any trading or contact with other human beings, from perhaps Cuba or maybe the Bahamas, that may have rode upon our shores. Some agreement. It would not last long. There had already been one Seminole Indian War, a conflict with white settlers, prior to the Treaty of Moultrie Creek and the establishment of Fort Brooke, that ended around 1819. There would be two more Seminole Wars to follow. The natives were not happy with the way white settlers were treating them, and the white settlers just didn't like the culture and the lifestyle of the Indians. Florida became an official territory of the United States in 1819 with the Adams-Onis Treaty, whereby Spain officially ceded Florida to the United States government, and the United States government took full possession of Florida in 1821, after legally purchasing the territory from Spain. By 1823 the government decided to take official action with the Seminoles and devised the Treaty of Moultrie Creek, which required the tribe to move to the reservation in central Florida. While a lot of Seminoles had reservations about it, some major tribe chiefs did initially and reluctantly agree to, and signed, the treaty, as it did provide monetary compensation for the move, as well as other provisions such as cattle, hogs and farming equipment, and even a year's worth of rations, until the Indians got settled onto the reservation. But complications with the terrain itself, drought, and the restriction of the boundaries did not make the Seminoles happy in the long run, and 2 more Seminole wars were to follow. In any event, Fort Brooke was established, where downtown Tampa sits today, to cover its precinct at the border of the reservation to oversee it, and to ensure that the Seminoles stuck to their part of the bargain of the treaty. Colonel George Mercer Brooke and Colonel James Gadsden of the United States Army were assigned to establish and command the fort, which was officially christened Fort Brooke in 1824. George Mercer Brooke was born in Virginia in 1785 and served during the War of 1812. He would later become a major general in the Army and in 1846 was appointed commander of the Western Division of the Army and was in charge of the United States territory west of the Mississippi River. General Brooke died in 1851. That's who the fort was named after. Colonel James Gadsden was second in command of Fort Brooke. He was born in South Carolina in 1788. Gadsden also served in the War of 1812, under then-General Andrew Jackson. After Fort Brooke was firmly established, Colonel Gadsden quit the U.S. Army. He became a planter in Florida, as well as a politician, serving on the Florida Territorial Legislature, and a businessman, serving as president of the South Carolina Railroad Company. Gadsden was also an advocate for the complete expulsion from Florida of the Seminole Indian tribe, to be moved out west, against their will, to Oklahoma on the Indians' Trail of Tears. As well, Gadsden was a proponent for slavery, and advocated secession of South Carolina from the Union. When California was admitted to the Union in 1850, James Gadsden proposed the idea that the state be divided into 2, wanting the southern half to allow slavery. Gadsden considered slavery a social blessing, and abolitionists the greatest curse of the nation. Gadsden did not like Native American Indians such as the Seminoles, and considered African Americans only useful for slavery to help white Americans prosper. Gadsden Point, at the tip of South Tampa, next to MacDill Air Force Base, is still named after him. There is also a recreational park at the location on South MacDill Avenue called Gadsden Park, which has baseball fields, a playground and picnic tables, which at the time this video was made, is still named after a man that advocated slavery and the expulsion of a race of people from the state of Florida. Gadsden's wish for California to have slavery, and for South Carolina to continue slavery did not come true, and fortunately the plurality of the American consciousness has changed for the better over a century later. James Gadsden is credited and was responsible for the Gadsden Purchase, or the Gadsden Treaty, whereby he officially negotiated a purchase deal with Mexico, after the Mexican-American War, legally acquiring more land for the United States in what is now southern New Mexico and Arizona, and defining a firm and definitive border between the two countries. So now you know a little about how and why Fort Brooke was established, in Tampa, in 1824, and you learned a little about the colonels who established it as well. Of course, naturally, civilians had a hand in establishing Tampa too, earning their keep by helping and supplying both sides of the human equation, bartering, trading, even translating, and dancing to the beat and sounds of both sides of that human equalization dirt street. They kicked up their heels quite a bit too, leaving dust. Cohabiting and mingling with straight-laced colonels on the one end, and inherent, pristine natives on the other, a feller needs a drink now and then. Bottoms up. A lot of them stuck to that street though, and made sure, down the road, that it got bigger, better, and paved, so indubitably many of them did, indeed, get laid, as did the bricks themselves, soon enough, and got to work with their visions, ideas, their trades, dreams, their futures there, shed any fears, many a tears, on what it is, their little piece of wilderness, plus paradise, surrounded by bays, poetically and solely branded Tampa, albeit not Tampa Bay. Hey Gilligan. That's right, Tampa was the settlers' touch of paradise. It still is, a bit choppy at times, depending on the weather. Built on a freshwater tidal river that flows into a silvery, salt-water bay, the landscape anchors many freshwater lakes as well. The region hosted prime fishing and hunting headquarters for survival. No wonder it ruffled many Seminole feathers, being scalped from it all. Whether there were a few indigenous people, fleeing slaves from southern plantations, pearly white settlers, or mix-matched military inserts, Tampa became home to a leisurely growing population, which, after some train tracks were laid, decades later, started to flourish, on the double. When Fort Brooke established itself at its location, the area was already known as Tampa. So I bet you're wondering how Tampa got its name.
I wonder how Tampa got its name.
Well, Timmy, I'll tell you how Tampa got its name. As the story goes, and he wrote the story himself, so he ought to know. As his story goes, the area was called Tampa, with an N. The first written account of the name, Tampa, appeared in a memoir written by a man by the name of Hernando de Escalante Fontaneda. Fontaneda was of Spanish descent, and was born in Cartagena, Colombia, South America. In 1549, when Fontaneda was 13 years old, he and his brother set sail for Salamanca, Spain, to study at school, but because of bad weather, the ship wrecked right off the coast of Florida. The surviving crew and passengers of the ship were captured by a Calusa Indian tribe, who kept them as their slaves, and eventually sacrificed most of them to their gods, including Escalante Fontaneda's brother. Escalante Fontaneda escaped his own death by correctly learning and interpreting the language and commands of the Calusa tribe, and possibly other tribes, and entertained them, and sang and danced for them. He spent the next 17 years living with the Calusa and other tribes, learning their different languages, and traveling all over Florida with them. In 1566, at 30 years old, Fontaneda was rescued from his captivity by Admiral Pedro Menendez de Avilas, Florida's first Spanish governor, and the founder of St. Augustine, the oldest continuously inhabited European established settlement in the United States. Menendez bargained for Fontaneda's release and freedom from King Carlos Calusa, as the Spanish called him, the chief of the Calusa tribe. I'm not sure what the bargain was, but Fontaneda then served as an interpreter and guide for Menendez on several missions throughout Florida over the next several years. After his adventures in Florida, and the schooling that he never intended to get, Fontaneda eventually did make it to Spain, in 1569, to reclaim his parents' property from the crown. In 1575, not long before his death, Fontaneda wrote his memoirs about his experiences living with the Native American tribes in Florida, which proves invaluable to historians to this day, and describes and identifies the area of Tampa. But there is a twist to this story. Fontaneda's journals actually placed Tampa at the mouth of Charlotte Harbor, where the Peace River flows into the Gulf of Mexico, near Punta Gorda, located considerably south of the present-day Tampa. A later Spanish expedition, sailing along the west coast of Florida, mistakenly identified and assumed the current Tampa Bay was Charlotte Harbor, and the name was accidentally transferred north, and stuck, for good. Furthermore, talk about being stuck with the name Tampa. The term actually means sticks, to a degree, and a high degree at that. The most commonly held notion is that the name Tampa means sticks of fire in the Calusa language, perhaps referring to the high number of lightning strikes in that region of Florida. Tampa can also be translated as burning sticks, possibly concerning burning fires in the vast palmetto fields of wild Florida. There are other claims as to the origin of the name Tampa as well, yet most historians use Tampa, as described by Escalante Fontaneda's memoir, as to the original name of the area. To this degree, the Calusa's moniker, Sticks of Fire, Stuck, and Tampa, was eventually and phonetically translated to Tampa by European cultured settlers. So, now you know how Tampa got its name, and that the moniker, Sticks of Fire, indeed, stuck. Truly. You also learned how Tampa came to be established, developing as a fort, as well as the settlers setting themselves up outside the fort. Of course, naturally, the Tampa area, and all of Florida, had been inhabited by various people and tribes for thousands of years before any European colonists or Seminole Indians appeared on the scene. Actually, the Seminoles were comprised of remaining indigenous peoples, refugees and escapees from other Indian tribes up north, such as the Yuchi, Yamasee and Creeks, and even escaped slaves fleeing southern plantations. Originating in the early 1700s, this group of people intermingled, cohabitated and crossbred in a process known as ethnogenesis, to form and construct a new culture of people, known as the Seminoles. As a matter of fact, the word Seminole is derived from the Muskogee Creek Indian word, Semano-li, which means wild, or runaway, in their language, the tribe consisting of absconders, defectors and fugitives from other Indian tribes, as well as slave plantations. Fort Brooke would serve as a major military outpost on Central Florida's west coast during the next two Seminole Indian Wars, as well as the American Civil War. The arrangement that the Seminoles remain on a reservation did not work out well in the long run, leading to two more Seminole Wars. The Seminoles often left the boundaries of the reservation for better hunting for food, for survival. Fleeing slaves from southern plantations, as well as newer Florida plantations, would run away and seek refuge on the reservations, leading to skirmishes and fights between the Seminoles and slave catchers as to the ownership versus the freedom of the slaves. But more significantly, white Americans, in reality, just did not want the Seminole Indians living anywhere in Florida at all, reservation or no reservation. When the old enemy of the Seminoles, Andrew Jackson, became the 7th President of the United States in 1829, he also wanted the Seminoles moved out of Florida altogether. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, which Jackson promoted, demanding that all Indian tribes, including the Seminoles, be moved west of the Mississippi River. In 1834, the Treaty of Payne's Landing was devised, specifically demanding that the Seminole Indian tribe had 3 years to move west of the Mississippi River, before Florida would become an official state of the Union, which would be 1845. Most of the Seminoles eventually, albeit reluctantly, did move out west of the Mississippi River to Oklahoma, along with other Indian tribes, such as the Cherokee, Muskogee Creeks, Chickasaw and Choctaw nations during the Trail of Tears, occurring between 1830 and 1850. This ethnic cleansing that the U.S. government forced on the Indians was gradual, yet it forcibly removed these indigenous people from their ancestral homelands in the southeastern United States. The relocation caused much suffering and death of the Indians due to exposure, disease and starvation, amounting to almost genocide. Yet, many survived and were forced to live on reservations in Oklahoma. Still, some Seminoles resisted being forced to move from their native land in Florida, and a third and final Seminole War broke out and lasted from 1855 to 1858. Eventually, the U.S. government just gave up on the war, mainly because the remaining Seminoles would not give up, and because the war was costing too much money and resources for the government. As a result, the surviving band of Seminoles of the Everglades would be the only federally recognized Indian nation which never relinquished sovereignty or signed a peace treaty with the United States. Today, there are 6 existing Seminole tribe reservations in Florida, the Big Cypress Reservation being the largest. There are also the Brighton Reservation, the Hollywood Reservation, the Immokalee Reservation, the Fort Pierce Reservation, and the Tampa Reservation in Hillsborough County. Some reservations have casinos. The Tampa Reservation was founded in 1980 on 9 acres of land northeast of downtown Tampa. The Seminole Hard Rock Hotel, Cafe, and Casino are located on the reservation in Tampa. Since it is a reservation, gambling is allowed. The casinos and hotels fuel the Seminole economy. They deserve some reparation and restitution for all the hardship and trouble the United States government put them through, a century or so ago. Fort Brooke became almost obsolete after the removal of most of the Seminole Indians after the Trail of Tears, and especially after the Third Seminole War ended in 1858, where most of the few remaining Seminoles took refuge in the Everglades. Nevertheless, the fort did remain open, as the U.S. government wanted a small contingent of soldiers to remain stationed in some of the coastal forts, Fort Brooke being one of them. Then, of course, the American Civil War came along in 1861, and the fort continued to stay open. Fort Brooke did not see a whole lot of action during the Civil War, except for one notable incident that occurred for a few days in October of 1863, aptly called the Battle of Fort Brooke. There wasn't much excitement or activity at Fort Brooke during the Civil War, except for a particular occurrence that happened for a few days between October 16 and October 18 of 1863, known as the Battle of Fort Brooke. Tampa was an important port for exporting cattle and crops from ranches and farms located in the interior of central Florida before the Civil War. This is today the Port of Tampa, not to be confused with the future Port Tampa City, which would be developed 2 decades later by Henry Plant, the fact being that the waters of Port Tampa City were actually deeper at the time than the waters of the Port of Tampa, for the larger ships that would be built later on. Yet, eventually, the Port of Tampa channels would be dredged deeper, in years to come, especially after the hurricane of 1921, which devastated parts of Port Tampa City. You'll learn about the evolution of Port Tampa City in a video downstream. By 1862, most local shipping had been thwarted at the mouth of Tampa Bay and the Gulf of Mexico by Union ships patrolling the area, trying to prevent and block Tampa's ships from exporting or importing any goods or cargo. However, several aptly named blockade runners, light and fast cargo vessels based at Fort Brooke and Tampa's port, frequently slipped out and snuck by the Union ships in their effort to deliver cattle, cotton and other crops to Spanish Cuba, in exchange for other goods, and even gold, that the civilians and military, alike, needed for endurance and survival. The Union naval forces wanted to put an end to the blockade runners that were sneaking by the Union ships to continue their trading. On October 16, 1863, two Union gunships, the USS Tahoma and the USS Adela, sailed into Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay, and started a slow bombardment of Fort Brooke, actually missing any direct hits of artillery or cannons, most of the cannonballs going into Hillsborough Bay. It was more of a diversion really, as while Fort Brooke was being bombarded, a Union raiding party of about 100 troops disembarked near the current Ballast Point area, and marched 14 miles north through the wooded areas of what is today Palmacia, West Tampa and Seminole Heights, and marched to the Jean Street shipyard on the Hillsborough River, near today's Sly Avenue. There they seized and burned several ships moored at the dock, including two notorious blockade runners, the Scottish Chief and the Kate Dale. The ships and the shipyard were owned at the time by the former mayor, James McKay Sr., who served as mayor of tiny Tampa from 1859 to 1860. McKay and some of his crew members, escaping capture, sped to the town in one boat down the Hillsborough River, and warned the Confederate forces at Fort Brooke about the raiding party and the fate of his ships. Confederate soldiers, along with some citizens, gave chase and caught up with the Union detachment near their landing point at Ballast Point. A short, but fierce, engagement, known as the Battle of Ballast Point, ensued, as Union troops attempted to flee, and board their dinghies at today's Ballast Point Park, and return to their waiting ships on Hillsborough Bay. With the help of the Union ships, the Tahoma and the Adelia, bombarding the Confederate forces and civilians on land, chasing the Union raiding party, most of the raiding party did make it back to their ships via the dinghies, although there were a few casualties on both sides. The Union ships and their forces soon sailed away from Tampa Bay. As a result of the seizure and burning of Tampa's blockade runners on the Hillsborough River, that were owned by James McKay Sr., the Scottish Chief and the A.B. Noyes were too heavily damaged, so were stripped of their usable materials and then destroyed. The Kate Dale sank near its mooring and to this day remains at the bottom of the Hillsborough River near the current Lowry Park Zoo. The Union raid did meet its objective. Shipping out of Tampa came to a virtual halt for the rest of the war, and crippled the local economy. When Union forces again landed in Tampa in May of 1864, Fort Brooke was no longer garrisoned, and the town had been almost abandoned. Remaining cannons and supplies at the fort were destroyed, and Union troops left the area for good after a short occupation. After the Civil War, Fort Brooke languished and became less significant, but still active, barely. In 1882 the last roll call of soldiers was given, and the fort and post were decommissioned by the U.S. Army in 1883. After the fort was closed, most of the land was open to homesteaders, with some garrison strongholds remaining on the site. After the post was decommissioned, Fort Brooke became an independent and incorporated town in 1885. By 1907 Fort Brooke was annexed to the city of Tampa. After the fort was decommissioned, in 1883, Tampa began a period of substantial growth, due primarily to the railroad coming to the area by way of Henry B. Plant. You'll learn more about Tampa's growth due to the railroad in an upcoming video. Most of Fort Brooke's main structures were located at the current site of the Tampa Convention Center, and, with other constructions and encampments, the stronghold also occupied the areas of the current Tampa Bay History Center, Curtis Hickson Waterfront Park, Amalie Arena and Tampa Riverwalk. During the modern construction projects of these familiar Tampa buildings and structures, several American Army and Seminole Indian cemeteries were discovered, along with many artifacts. The U.S. soldiers' remains were reinterred at the Florida National Cemetery in Bushnell, Florida, and the Native American remains were transferred to the Seminole tribe of Florida. Many artifacts were given to the Tampa Bay History Center and other institutions for preservation and research. I hope you enjoyed Tampa History's first video about Fort Brooke. Thank you for watching. If you were fond of the video, please like and subscribe to the channel below. And tell your friends who might enjoy it as well. Also, please feel free to leave any comments or suggestions. You can count your railroad tracks that the next video will be about Henry B. Plant and his railroad coming to Tampa. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. 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 Thank you for watching.